as a human, I was like, oh, here for now, I'd love to be on a beach somewhere. But as an elected, I couldn't think ahead far enough because it was in constant emergency mode. What do I need to do next? Who do we need to help next? And there was no space for it.
We're here today with New York State Assemblywoman Catalina Cruz, who represents the 39th New York State Assembly District in Queens. Assemblywoman Cruz, thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me back, Ricardo.
Before we start the interview, given everything that's been going on in your home country of Colombia, is there anything that you'd like to say about what's going on in your homeland?
It's a terrible situation back home right now. The country is going through one of its worst social crises in a very, very long time. A couple of months ago, the president proposed a tax reform that would have put poor working Colombians and lower middle class to pay off the debt that the country allegedly incurred during COVID in order to keep the country afloat. The country has had one of the most preposterous vaccine rollouts. Their response to keeping people alive and healthy and businesses afloat has been a disaster. They had to borrow money, and now they want to use the working poor and poor people to pay it off by increasing taxes, by placing taxes on items that have never had it, like milk, eggs, meat, your light, your gas, the kinds of things that people need to survive, and by making people pay income taxes who have never had to pay it before. And I'm not talking about the rich, I'm talking about the very, very poor. And so when you have a country that's been undergoing a crisis because of the pandemic, and you add to that the government trying to stay afloat on the back of many of those same people who suffer the most, it was a perfect recipe for people to rebel, for people to say absolutely not a single moment more, not a single thing more. And when they went out into the street, the government's response was to kill people. And folks back home, there's, depending on who you ask, they have the same arguments that you and I saw during the BLM protest last year, where it's like, oh, no, that's fake news. That's a doctor video. And many of us saw it with our own eyes. So we know that the media can be manipulated. You have a country where I would say 75% of the media is not free press. And so they're able to control the narrative back home, but not here. So what I'm hoping to see is a lot of international pressure to force the country to do the right thing, to force the president to really, truly respect the lives of people. I have family members who are reporters and are on the ground, and the stories that I'm hearing, corroborated stories that I'm hearing, are women saying that they've been raped, and I'm not talking one or two, by the militarized police, of people being killed right in front of the public, in the middle of a peaceful protest, people being killed. And granted, there are situations where protests have gone out of hand because the same protesters were being rowdy or being violent themselves. But under absolutely no universe does raping someone or murdering someone serve as a response to possibly a burned car or something else of that nature. And so I think what we're seeing now is what we saw in certain Middle Eastern and European countries in the last couple of years. We're having our own spring. And we're having people wake up and understand that those who govern us should not be idolized, that they also screw up, that we need to hold them accountable, that there is clear corruption in the country, and that people are saying no more. I worry for my family. I worry for the country. But something just like the protests around Black Lives Matter felt very different for us last year. It was almost like that was the last drop before everything exploded and we began down a path of change. That's what this feels like for the country.
Personally, my thoughts to you and your family, and we'll keep watching. You know, um, Now to shift gears, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the passing of the state budget. So going into this budget season, there was concerns and almost an expectation that there were going to be cuts to significant cuts to the budget, and that wasn't the case. In fact, this budget came out to be quite progressive.
Look, I think uh, the expectation that we were going to be in a hole was so much so that I had already began conversations with organizations that I support to say, start thinking of what you can cut. I had an expectation that at the very least, we would lose 25% funding, at the very least. And I started asking them, look, I'm going to push for increase. We could only hope to have the same amount, but you should start thinking about cuts and what you can live with. And then the federal government stepped in. And then I think both houses of the legislature saw that even if we got money from the federal government, it wasn't going to be enough to do everything that we needed to do to get the state back on its feet and thriving, because it was no longer about just surviving. We needed to thrive as a state too. And so we had these two positions where it's like, okay, the federal government is giving us this much, but we need about this much. And even if we ourselves do this much in taxes, we still need the federal government. And so it was like we married the income that was coming in, and between the increase in taxes, the readjustment of some of our own investments to increase in some places, and a few places did see a decrease. And the federal funds that we got, we were able to have such a progressive outlook in our budget that is going to allow us, I think, to have the kind of future our state deserves, from tackling the back rent that so many people have, to providing more money for small businesses so that they can get back on their feet and therefore give jobs and therefore put people back to work, to being able to tackle the thousands of New Yorkers who did not get any help simply because they were undocumented, but happened to be the same workers that worked throughout the pandemic. And when they did stop working, had no choice but to be out there doing other things that were paid off the books, underpaid, and risking their health. And so when you look at that, plus getting to do things like funding schools in a way that in a couple of years it'll put us back to full funding, it's unheard of. I heard the speaker say during his closing statements during the budget that he always does, he's been in the assembly 20 years, and this is the most progressive budget he's ever done. And I believe it. I feel very proud of the work that we did for the budget. I feel very confident that New Yorkers are going to see benefits that will improve all of their lives. I will say, I want to see where we are a year from now, because we may need to still invest even more, because we foresee what the damage could be, the economic damage of this pandemic could be, but it could be worse than we expected. I mean, it could be better. You're still hoping, but it could be worse. And so I think as electeds, one of our job is to continuously analyze the status of our communities and see where do we need to still add items to, subtract from, review, etc.
What were some of the things that you needed to see in the budget for you to vote yes on it?
I needed to see excluded workers passing. I worked very hard with the advocates and the drafting team, and Carmen de la Rosa, who I think did a fantastic job leading the way for this. I needed to see the 50 million that I got for Nourish New York, which is the program that works with the upstate farmers to have their surplus be purchased by the downstate food pantries. Those were my main things, and I always need to see my legal services for immigrants being funded. I needed to make sure that we had a robust investment in small businesses. I am very big on supporting small businesses because I think that they are the ones, it's the bodegas, it's the clothing stores, it's the shoe stores, it's the hair salons, the nail salons, it's all of those little businesses in the neighborhood, the diners, all of them that employ people that live in the neighborhood that were hit the hardest during the pandemic. So if I don't have help for them to get them back on their feet, to be better, to have more jobs for people, then I wasn't willing to be supportive of the budget. But I have to say that from the get-go, I saw a commitment from the speaker and a commitment from my colleagues to prioritize those issues because many of them needed the same for their districts.
Does this type of budget pass if we didn't experience a pandemic?
No.
Why do you think so?
I think it would be very tough for the federal government to be able to excuse that increase in investment to these states without a pandemic. A lot of the money that we needed came from yes, we raised taxes and yes, we have our own revenue coming in, but that would have never been enough to get us to the investment level that we are now. We needed the federal money as well. And I don't foresee the federal government giving us as much as they did if we had not had a pandemic that in their eyes necessitated that level of investment in individual states.
The federal funding that helped spark this aggressive spending, all things considered, if we're not in a crisis, we don't have that kick in the ass to see what's necessary, what has been failing.
You're right. I think it's the thought that the pandemic really brought lots of institutions and lots of people to their knees to rethink, how do we do what we do? Is it working? What are we investing on? And realizing that if we didn't invest in a different way, if we didn't try to push for more progress, whatever that progress looked like, we would find ourselves in a deeper hole than we were even during the pandemic. So I think even if you're like, I think you're right.
So is there anything that didn't make it into the budget that you wish did?
Yes, healthcare for undocumented immigrants. There was a proposal of about $20 million to help undocumented immigrants, prioritizing, of course, those who were most affected by COVID, and ensuring that that there was preventative healthcare for a few others. That would have been a game changer, especially in a district like mine, where we ended up as the epicenter because so many of our undocumented community did not have access to preventative healthcare or even emergency healthcare. And so I wish that would have ended up as part of the budget.
Now, speaking of undocumented workers, since day one from when the pandemic started, your major concern last year was the undocumented community. From that time to now, how do you feel that effort of them being included with this recovery has gone?
I think there's been a vast improvement. We went from a community that got absolutely no benefits to a community that now has access to the rent assistance as well as excluded workers. There's, of course, room for improvement. For example, I had to basically beg and plead and then fight with the governor and the mayor about access to vaccinations in my district. And they ultimately listened, and to the governor's credit, they've set up several pop-ups in my district. The mayor now put in a semi-permanent vaccination bus in Corona as well. Corona happens to be the district with the highest number of deaths and positive cases in Queens, but the one with the lowest vaccination rate. Like it's insane that we weren't prioritized the way that we should be, and so we are hoping that those numbers will continue to increase when it comes to actual vaccination rate and people being healthier. But I do think that we've gone from an afterthought to maybe a second thought.
In January, the Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Hasty, appointed you chair on the task force on New Americans. And congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
What was the motivation behind forming this task force? And as chair, what are some of the short-term goals that you have in mind, and what are some of the long-term goals?
So the task force has been around for a little while. I am very proud to be the new chair. I've had various conversations with the speaker about taking the task force in a little bit of a new direction and using it as a fact-finding tool for the majority, and really looking at are we doing the job that we set out to do when it comes to investing in immigrant communities? We're putting a lot of money into social safety net programs and into legal services and into other things that benefit our immigrant community, but is it working? And is it working the way that we intended it to work? And so one of the things that we began doing is listening sessions. We were going to do them by traveling locally, but the pandemic. And so we're doing them virtually, and each one focuses on a different topic in a different area of the state. And it really seeks to listen to the local electeds, as well as the local community organizations about what's happening in that area, how do we improve it, what kind of investment laws, et cetera, are they suggesting we do? My goal is to come up with some sort of white paper or report that really takes a look at what are the needs of our immigrant community around the state and how do we better meet them. I'm very proud of kind of this effort. We just had our last virtual listening session yesterday, and I'm hoping we're going to do even additional ones on focus on other issues. We are also doing virtual trainings called Community for All. It's a series in partnership with NALEO, New York Immigration Coalition, and several other organizations that, and what we're seeking to do is make sure that we are telling folks that no matter what your immigration status is, citizen, non-citizen, et cetera, there is a way for you to become engaged in your community and fight for the things that you care about. And how do we do that? We do that by volunteering, by voting if you can vote, by writing to your local elected, and you need to understand what is a local elected, what's a council member, what does a state senator do, et cetera. So we do that kind of information. Now with reapportionment coming and drawing the new lines, what does that look like? How does it influence you? How do you want to influence the process? What does ranked choice voting mean? Without really talking about who's voting for who, because that's political. We get into the in-depth of what's the process look like, how do we do it? And so what we seek to do is not only listen to folks, but kind of give them tools and educational tools to kind of get information out there. What else? It's just we also pushed for certain priorities in the budget. One of them was the $50 million for Nourish New York, and it was a success. And we're going to be looking at legislation. One of the bills seeks to amend the human rights law to add immigration status as a kind of a protected class, and we're hoping that'll move forward soonish. We really want to make sure that we are using this task force as a tool for the legislature to better work with immigrant communities.
Talking about the epicenter of your district, how has things been going inside your district?
I see signs of improvement. There's still lots of folks who are unemployed. There's still lots of folks whose businesses are closed, but I see signs of improvement. We got a brand new bagel store that we didn't have before. We got businesses reopening that were closed for a very long time. I've heard from friends who had been out of work because they had COVID, a loved one had COVID, et cetera, et cetera. I got several texts today actually of people that are going back to work. So there are rays of sunshine here and there, but there's still a long way because I'm still seeing folks who are sleeping in the streets that were sleeping in the streets 6 months ago and a year ago. There's still people who have no other choice but to go to a food pantry. And so there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but there are rays of sunshine.
This is something that I should have asked you last year. As an elected official and as an individual, where did you think we would be 1 year removed?
So at the start of COVID, I thought there was going to be a lot more action from the government. I thought that we'd get a lot more financial help, outreach, help for small businesses. They failed us completely. And because while the big numbers are what makes a headline, 50 billion for this or 20 billion for that, the reality is that members of my community, for a number of reasons, beginning with the government not doing outreach themselves, to the fact that some of them have not the best business practices because they haven't really received any support and learned how to do it better, couldn't access that help. We were abandoned. And toward the middle of COVID, I was completely disillusioned with government. And I got to tell you, I had my own crisis on whether I wanted to continue to be a part of this system, because it felt like we were swimming upstream and it was just so exhausting to continue to fight for something that, why do I need to fight with the mayor's office about basic things like a testing site? Or like, if your testing site is going to close, can you let us know so that we don't send people? Like, it's just basic things. And I think I was in such emergency mode that I couldn't think a year ahead. I was thinking in spaces of like, what's going to happen next month, in the month after that, in the month after that. I don't think I ever allowed myself to really think, what am I going to do a year from now? Other than like, not as an elected official, like as a human, I was like, oh, a year from now, I'd love to be on a beach somewhere. But as an elected, I couldn't think ahead far enough, because it was in constant emergency mode. What do I need to do next? Who do we need to help next? And it just, there was no space for it.
Now, what is your perception of local government, given
It's a disaster. It's a disaster. It's look, one of my local council members only came out to start doing work for the community because he's being primary this year. And like, he's out there trying to give food, and everybody knows, and PPE and knocking on doors, things that he had 4 years to do and he never did. And the only reason he's out there is because he's primaried. And during the height of the pandemic, he was nowhere to be found. He had a PPE giveaway and then changed the address and then told no one, and people were calling me. I'm like, I don't know, that's his office. Like, it's just a complete disaster. We have a mayor who, during the entire time COVID was happening, didn't call a single time on a personal level to see what he could do for my community. I routinely went to his office and hollered and screamed and demanded things. He never called me. And then I get nominated for a national award, and then he calls me, and I'm like, the priorities of this local government are just out of whack. We're here trying to figure out, how do we prioritize issues in our office? And it's like, what are you doing, Mr. Mayor? What are you doing, Mr. Council Member? And I have to say, with Danny's team, I routinely partner with him to do outreach, to do Zooms, to educate people. Like, that's what we should be doing. How do we collaborate with each other? But people were spending more time, the mayor and the governor, fighting each other than actually doing the work that the people needed. And so, I'd like our next administration to be one that that isn't centered on ego and shining. Because frankly, what we really need right now is a worker bee. Someone's going to go and do the work for the community.
And when you say Danny, you mean Councilman Danny Drum, right?
Yes,
All right,
yes.
cool. That actually leads into my next question. What are the things that you want to see the council invest in? And the next administration, what is your expectations for them?
I'd love to see them put back the money that they took from sanitation, because sanitation's budget last year so drastically that it has left our streets looking like a third world country in certain parts. And if I may add, it's streets in poor neighborhoods like Corona, because you go to the Upper West Side, you go to places in the Bronx where there's more affluent members of the community, and that's not happening. And so I want them to not only reinvest in DASNY, but also um, make sure that they are reprioritizing and giving every single community their just due. It's just that simple. I want to see them invest in food insecurity, in financial education, in affordable housing programs, and in ESOL programs, and just have a budget that really truly invests in people and less in entities. I want to see a real commitment. Last year, they claimed that they cut the. There was a claim that the budget for the NYPD was cut, but it really wasn't, because if you look at how the money was moved around, it made no sense. I want to see an actual drastic decrease in the funding for the NYPD and taking that money and reinvesting it in the community, in gun prevention, violence prevention, violence intervention, like all of those kinds of programs that really are going to tackle the issues that for a long time we've had the NYPD dealing with, that they have no capacity to deal with, not because they don't want to, but because they're not trained to. And so how do we move those things around in a way that makes sense? And I want to see that kind of city council. And on a local level, I want to see more investment. My top issue, because I know that that's the one thing they control around here, is they need to pick up our garbage.
Is there anything that you would like to add that you feel like we haven't addressed today?
Look, I think I'm very concerned with how our vaccination rates are. I'd like to believe that we can get to herd immunity, but I still see a lot of hesitation from people. I still see a lot of our government not doing as much as they can. They're doing more than they were doing before. I'll give them that much, but it doesn't feel like it's enough just yet. I'd like to see us get to that 75% vaccination rate before the end of the summer, before people start going crazy and partying. So my I guess my closing statement is a pitch for people to get vaccinated. If you don't do it for yourself, do it for those you love, for the senior in your life, or the child in your life, for the idea that you don't want to be that person that brings it home, brings it to work, passes it to somebody you really love, and they die because you didn't want to get the vaccine.
In terms of your district, in terms of your communities, are you seeing this issue that people are just afraid to get it?
Very few. There are some, but very few. But when we've made it accessible to people at hours that work for them, days that work for them, the appointments sell out.
Assemblywoman Catalina Cruz, again, thank you for coming back. Continue fighting a good fight. You're one of the good ones. Honestly, you're one of the good ones.
Thank you, Ricardo. I appreciate your time and always reaching out. It is a tough process, and I hope just folks understand how real this is. Go get vaccinated. It's not too late.